speak in the opposite language. But if you are bilingual, you can just feel free to listen to everyone in their original language. You will not have to select the language channel, and you will not ever have to hear our voices. As always, when you select your language, you can check the original audio, so you don't have to be hearing both languages at the same time. As always, I have a special ask for the English-speaking audience, and that's just please pay attention to the speed in which you're speaking. Since Spanish tends to be about 20% longer than English, just please make sure that you're speaking at a conversational pace, and please make sure that you don't pick up your reading speed. So thank you so much for that. Buenas tardes a todos y todas. Mi nombre es Diego Pons. Estoy aquí hoy de parte de la Cooperativa Comunitaria de la Justicia del Lenguaje con mi colega Valentina. Como siempre, gracias por invitarnos hoy a su reunión. Los organizadores de esta reunión se han comprometido hoy a servir la justicia del lenguaje. Lo que eso significa es que queremos crear un espacio para que todas las personas puedan participar e involucrarse en el idioma de su corazón, que es simplemente el idioma en que todas las personas se sientan más cómodas. Y hoy vamos a utilizar la interpretación simultánea para poder crear este espacio aquí en Zoom en inglés y en español. Cuando yo termine de decir esto, se va a activar la interpretación. Cuando la interpretación está activada, usted va a poder observar un icono en un globo terráqueo que dirá interpretación, ahí abajo en la derecha de su pantalla. Por favor, seleccione ese icono del globo terráqueo cuando aparezca y por favor, seleccione su idioma preferido. Pero si usted está asistiendo hoy a esta reunión en su celular o en su tableta, yo le voy a pedir que por favor busque la opción que dice More, que quiere decir más, o el botón de 3 puntos para que usted pueda seleccionar su idioma preferido de esa manera. Y si usted no es completamente bilingüe, le vamos a pedir que por favor seleccione su idioma preferido para que usted pueda utilizar la interpretación cuando alguien esté hablando en el otro idioma. Pero si usted sí es bilingüe, se puede sentir libre hoy de escuchar a todos en su idioma original. No tendría que seleccionar ningún canal de idioma y jamás tendrían que escuchar nuestras voces. Y como siempre, cuando usted seleccione su idioma, puede hacer clic en silenciar el audio original para no escuchar ambos idiomas al mismo tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Diego, for providing that grounding for us and reminding us about the importance of language justice. I will just go ahead and remind everyone that in this subcommittee in particular, the definition of disproportionately impacted community, that in Spanish, the term disproportionately impacted community is comunidad afectada en manera desproporcionada, which is a lot more syllables than English. So please, 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 avoid saying DI community if you can. That acronym makes it really hard for the interpreters to keep up. We are still waiting on Ian, who is our subcommittee chair. So Lubna, I wonder if you could maybe just send him a quick email or text and check on where he is. But it does look like we have 3 of our other subcommittee members, Robin, Michael, and Tyson here, as well as Arthur, who is also on the task force as a guest, and then finally Brian Falver, who is sort of the proxy for Marcia, who can attend these meetings and speak on behalf of CDOT while she's out of the office, but will of course not be making any voting decisions since he is not a task force member. So glad to have you all here, and I think we have quorum to go ahead and get started. I will go ahead and just put a quick link to the agenda in the chat. So let me go ahead and do that for folks who haven't seen it before. And we can go ahead and get started. We've done our language justice statement. I don't think, I actually don't have a land acknowledgement prepared since usually Ian does that. So maybe we can hold off on that for now. We've done roll call. And then just a quick summary of where to find materials from the previous meeting. So as you all know, all materials for this subcommittee are available on the Google Drive in this link that I'm putting in the chat right now. And you can go ahead and look at the notes from the previous meeting if you'd like to kind of see what we covered. But just as a quick reminder, we had another discussion with some of our expert folks from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, who provided more information about census data reliability at different scales. Based on that discussion, you all reached the decision that the census block group scale is most likely the best scale to use, and decided not to recommend any changes for now to that scale. So that is still reflected in the draft definitions. And then we had a discussion of the task force recommendations and sort of worked on further refining the section of the recommendations relevant to the definition of disproportionately impacted community. At the end of the meeting, we then transitioned into an executive session where you all received legal advice about race being a component of the definition of disproportionately impacted community and used in Colorado EnviroScreen from our attorneys in the Attorney General's office, and then we received public comment. So just a quick refresher for those of you who are here and also those of you who weren't here. So today we are going to do two things, really. First, we're going to review some research that was conducted by staff at the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. The first is a follow-up to questions that you all raised at your prior meeting and that have come up during previous full task force meetings about housing cost burden and where the housing cost burden component fits within the definition of disproportionately impacted community. So you all should have a link in the agenda and in the email we sent you before the meeting, but here is the full link. I know it's a little bit long, to the Tableau page that Margaret Horden, who is in the Toxicology and Environmental Epidemiology office with the health department, created. So we'll be talking about that. We'll then be talking about research that Tova, who is our intern and here with us today, conducted on sort of census data reliability with respect to potential undercounts of communities of color and overcounts of communities that identify as white. And then finally, we will go into really a deep dive on the outstanding questions that remain in the draft task force recommendations. We've pulled out the section of the draft recommendations that we sent you all to review last Friday into a specific document that we'll be working through during this meeting. And then we do have several members of the public with us today, which is great. So we'll reserve the last 15 minutes of the meeting, 5:45 to 6 o'clock, for public comment. So any questions on that agenda before we get started? And welcome, Beatrice. Glad you could join us. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive into Margaret's housing cost burden map. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so everyone can see it. So let's see. Oops, sorry. There we go. All right, is that visible to everyone? It keeps loading for me. Can someone tell you if you can see it okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Is it continuously loading for you? No.
It doesn't look like it, no.
Okay. Great, well, that's good. I don't know why it's different on my screen. Thanks, Lubna. So hopefully all of you had a chance to review this before the meeting, but what this map shows is the areas, so census block groups in Colorado, that meet the definition of disproportionately impacted community solely because of their housing cost burden. So as a reminder, the Environmental Justice Act defines a disproportionately impacted community as including communities that are housing cost burdened, which the law then defines as a community where more than 40% of households spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. So as you can see, sorry, one more check, the map doesn't look like it's showing up on my screen. Can you all still see the map?
Yep.
Okay, good. I don't know why it's doing that. So as you can see on the map, these are census block groups that only meet the definition under that prong. So there are lots of other census block groups that also meet the definition under other prongs. For example, the income or race prong, those are not displayed here. So this is kind of answering directly Tyson's question about which communities are we bringing in solely because of that housing cost burden prong. So as you can see, they are distributed across the state. There are 275 of those block groups. 17, they are about 20%, I guess I would say, of the total number of census block groups that meet the definition. And about a quarter of them are above statewide median household income. So about 75%, 3/4 are below statewide median household income. You can also kind of see how different block groups compare to statewide median income. So I think that this is really, we added those additional data layers to kind of show, are these areas that are generally more or less affluent than the state as a whole? And certainly there are some areas that are in more affluent areas, right? So, we bring in some areas of, for example, Pitkin County, that, housing costs are very expensive there. We know that, but also definitely some areas that are not quite as affluent overall, or at least not above the statewide median income. So I want to pause there and just see if folks have any questions or thoughts or feedback, and kind of really directly, what does this data mean to you in terms of, whether you believe the housing cost burden prong should stay in the definition of disproportionately impacted community.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I had a work thing that carried over.
Welcome, Ian. We were just kind of looking at the housing cost burden research. Are any thoughts or feedback? Tyson, this was a question you specifically asked during the last meeting. Having looked at the data now, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, Joel, sorry, I just wanted to flag that it's just your desktop that is displaying right now.
Oh my gosh, I'm sharing the wrong screen. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Didn't realize that. How's that? Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess my question has to do, so when I went back and looked at the data, and this was the, gosh, where is it at? I apologize, give me a second here. So the data that was in the Excel file, I'm seeing some numbers on there on the data that you're showing on this below. And maybe this is just because that includes some other information, because so when you take out then median household income that doesn't qualify under the 200%, you're looking at almost everybody lying outside of that. Or this is bringing in, I guess, a whole new sector of people. People who seem to be more affluent. So let me look at this then. I'll just do number filters.
Yeah, so Tyson, to maybe put a finer point on that, one way to look at it is that, what this data shows is kind of what percentage and by how much of sorry, let me back up. So if you sort by this percent difference prong, this compares the median household income in each of these census block groups to the Colorado median household income. So you can see whether and by how much each census block group is more affluent than Colorado as a whole, if it meets this definition. So there are definitely some areas that are much more affluent than Colorado as a whole. So for example, this census block group in Denver County, which is, let's see, in kind of far northwest Denver over here in, I guess, kind of the Northwest Highlands or Berkeley area. It meets the definition under the housing cost burden prong because it has relatively expensive housing, but is still 77% higher than the median household income in Colorado. By contrast, if we scroll down to the bottom, there are also areas on this list that are much less affluent than Colorado as a whole. So this census block group in Montrose County does meet the definition solely under the housing cost burden prong, but it is its median household income is 65% lower than Colorado's average median household income. So that's an area of, I guess, southeastern Montrose. So the kind of overall number that Margaret calculated to kind of show that is that of the census block groups that meet the definition of disproportionately impacted community solely under the housing cost burden, about 75% or 3/4 have median household incomes lower than the statewide average, and 25% have median household incomes above the statewide average. So overall, more of the census block groups are relatively lower income. However, none of them have a 40% of their population at or below 200% of the federal poverty line, that none of them on this screen, which would be necessary to meet the definition under the income prong. So did that make sense?
So, and yeah, it does make sense. It makes perfect sense. I'm not a fan of using median household income as a gauge, I guess, because what we're not talking about median household income in Colorado. We're talking about, you know, communities that are disproportionately impacted in a way that they do not have the means to defend themselves. I guess this is again my point earlier of how do we prevent this from being taken advantage of by people who are affluent and who are going to be able to apply for grants and who are going to be able to utilize their resources to try and get this money to make improvements in their community, when again our whole purpose is to help those who don't have that ability. So, you know, like, I mean, even if you know, again, all of these are greater than 200% the poverty line, and they don't fit into any other category. I feel like if there's one of these communities that deserves to be in there, that they will be captured under the additional part B of the definition. You know, my thought is part A3 should be taken out because any special circumstances such as will be captured under part B, which gives a multitude of ways to capture, to make sure that nobody's left out, I guess. I definitely don't agree with that being left in, because it feels like everybody has a distinct advantage over the people that we're really trying to protect here.
Thanks, Tayson. So just to paraphrase, after seeing the data, you would support recommending removing the housing cost burden prong of the definition. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Other task force members, what do you think about that kind of specific question, which is one of the key questions we do want to answer today, if we can, now that you've spent a little more time looking at the data?
I'll jump in. I think the intention of the house burden component was about people who it's harder for them to engage with the government because they're so strained on their housing costs and trying to survive. And I don't know if we're trying to like eliminate the people who, you know, maybe aren't below the federal poverty line, but they're still really struggling to engage, and it takes extra to engage them.
And again, that's where I go back to part B. And if you look at the socioeconomic impacts, I mean, a lot of that stuff is covered under part B, I feel.
Go ahead, Beatriz, and while we're kind of line editing the document, Lubna will probably call on folks to facilitate from now on, and I'll kind of focus on making sure everyone has the right thing on the screen. So Beatriz, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. And I think kind of similar to Ian's point, Tyson, is especially CD3, what we see is that there's a lot of rural communities, and with the burdens of housing costs and then adding travel time to where a lot of these meetings happen, and then travel time for work, I think that the burden of traveling and the cost of living, sometimes people make a really good decent salary, but because housing is getting so expensive, it's not allowing them to participate in an equitable way, I would say. I do see a little bit of concern with this, especially with communities that haven't provided housing and that they should be, and then that they're going to fit into this definition. I've been thinking about that a lot too. When we have affluent resort communities that aren't doing their due share to provide affordable housing in their communities, and then they can fit in under this definition when they maybe shouldn't be as much. But again, we have to really think about also like how long does it take people to travel and to be able to participate, and how much of their income is going towards housing. It's just getting, with the cost of housing in Colorado, it's just getting harder for people to participate with those costs going up.
Thanks, Beatriz.
Yeah, I see that, but that was also added to Part B. Again, going back to Part B, it does say that very specifically as to lack of public participation in that.
Thanks. Thanks to both of you for that. Michael and then Robin.
Thanks. I don't know how I feel like we have to have the housing definition included on this. Tyson, I get your point, and I know what you're saying. It's included later on in the doc, or at least the socioeconomics piece. But I think to Beatriz's point and to Ann's point as well, the house and burden realities, and just thinking about the cumulative impacts that folks are having to deal with. I think that, like, I guess my question back to you is what is it that's causing causing you some concern? Because I hear what you're saying. I guess for me, I don't see why this be, why you don't want it to be included. I guess I need some more clarification.
Well, and my whole thought process around this is we are tasked to set out and create opportunities and protections for a very specific community, and that is the disproportionately impacted community, the people who are not able, for one reason or another, to protect themselves as an affluent community that has resources and money and time and transportation can do. And when I see communities that are, making, 77% above the median household income, which isn't even what we're talking about. We're not even talking about median household. Median household income isn't even really a topic of this. We are talking about low income. We have the 200% poverty level. We're trying to take a select few people and make sure that they have an equal opportunity to protect themselves. And I feel like when you kind of create this different scale, you're opening up loopholes and doors for people to get grants, for people to take money out of the kitty that is specifically reserved for the people that need that help and that need those resources. And you're taking those resources away from them because there's only so much money in this. And we've all talked about how important it is that this gets funded, how important it is that we have grants, how important it is that we have all of this stuff. It doesn't matter, you know, the scale of that has a limit, and there's only so much that's going to be granted. There's only so much that's going to be funded. I want to make sure that those funds and those grants go to the right people, not to people making $100,000 in their house, but they decided to buy a bigger house, or because the housing market prices have gone up, you know, they have a you know, a higher overall burden, but they still are netting more than, you know, most people make in a year. It just doesn't make any sense for those people to have the same opportunities.
Could I offer one suggestion?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
So it is, I don't have an opinion on whether we include housing cost burden specifically. My thought is, you know, there doesn't have to be necessarily, like, if you're disproportionately in like the same definition for all things. I know I've said this several times, but like, you know, if what we're concerned about is engagement, we can draft requirements for engagement that include this broader category while limiting availability of funds and grants like Tyson is talking about, or like consideration of impacts and permitting and equity analyses, right? To exclude, you know, specifically even like, or we could change the definition, or it's like housing costs burdened where the median income is also below, right? To like get at some of these issues, like it doesn't have to be all one thing or all the other, and there's no like flexibility in between, right? So if we are concerned primarily about places that are housing cost burdened, but their median income level is pretty high, right? Couldn't we just revise the definition to be specific about what we're talking about? Like for us, housing cost burden does not include where the income level is above the median income. Alternatively, sorry, my dog felt like joining us. Alternatively, we could say, you know, as I thought we've been talking about, is that like engagement requirements could and arguably should be broader, right? Like we should be looking for more engagement, and maybe it's a different scope than some of the more resource intensive equity analysis type considerations, right? And like communities. And so is there a way where we use a broader definition for outreach, and we use like a more narrow definition for communities that are going to have equity analyses or cumulative impact analyses done as part of agency action? I'm not advocating for any of those. I'm just putting it out there that it seems like we have this false narrative that it's all in for one thing or all out for the other thing. And I feel like there's a lot of space in between those two extreme outcomes.
So Robin, just to paraphrase, I think you're kind of coming back to these options we've had about kind of one definition versus multiple definitions, and maybe sort of suggesting, you know, the options have grown a little closer together over time, but some variation on sort of different definitions that are up, or categories that agencies can apply contextually in each context, which is sort of in a way both built into option 1 and option 2 now. Is that right?
So yes-ish. So one thing I was saying is that like, if people feel like they just want to keep housing cost burden in, but they're concerned about these communities where the income level is high, we could just like say that, right? We could just change the definition for all the things to exclude the communities where median household income is high. Alternatively, what I'm saying is if we end up in a space where we do have more than one term to define communities that get different types of analyses or have different engagement requirements, this could be one of the things that's included for engagement and outreach, but not necessarily included for cumulative impacts analysis or grant funding availability. That's what does that say it a little more succinctly?
I mean, that's Robert. I think that's what I was trying to get to. I think that there's a way that you can include you can include this in the definition and just have just a tighter kind of whether if it's still in CDPHE, you're having people monitor to see who's above the threshold or not. And I think you can set that up in a criteria, or you can have a process to kind of make sure that, you know, folks that, to Tyson's point, are trying to take advantage of the system or take advantage and try to get grants are not doing that. Like, that's all I'm saying. Me personally, I think we should keep this in the definition.
Thanks, Michael. Renee?
Hello, love. Sorry to join late. From what I'm overhearing, honestly, housing needs to have some form of being in this definition and some form of funding. Disproportionately impacted communities already do not even have so much as getting a housing stipend, and they live in those same spaces. So if we do not include this not only invalidates EJ Coalition's needs for addressing cumulative impacts, housing being one of them, but it also doesn't address the issues with land use and water rights. Not all DIC owns their own property. And to make such a broad stroke that somebody might abuse the system automatically now assumes that it's not going to be available for anybody. And that's exactly what creates a disproportionately impacted community. So being really mindful to not assume the worst of community and where we're actually moving with these forms of sensitivity, because affordable housing is not available in Colorado anymore. And it's kind of also recognizing where it correlates in data gaps and how housing is not just a known burden, but it's a growing burden specifically in these communities. And it does actually also show different forms of where there's even been water rights or land or even tax abuses to where redistricting or other things have added more of cumulative impacts in that space. Not that we need to address all that, but to not even put housing at all doesn't address it.
Thank you, Renee. So just to kind of summarize and move us on, because we have a lot of other important questions, it sounds like the majority of task force members who are here in the subcommittee today do support keeping the housing cost burden prong in the definition in some form, with sort of maybe some openness to flexibility around adjusting the current format. I wonder if you could kind of just quickly do a straw poll on those two options that Robin proposed of sort of revising the definition to be more specific. So keeping the current definition, but adding an additional limitation around, say, we don't have to decide what it is, but, you know, perhaps below the median household income for the state. And or the second solution of sort of also having a broader definition of disproportionately impacted community that applies in certain circumstances where that might be wise, and narrower in others where there's, say, a limited pool of resources being distributed. So to facilitate that straw poll, task force members, can you do the thumbs up emoji in Zoom if you support the first solution, if you would like to see that kind of built into the recommendations. Again, this is revising the definition to be more specific.
And I can count the thumbs, Joel. And if anybody's having trouble finding that emoji, feel free to just drop a heads up in the chat.
Great. So I see nearly all the task force members who are here, so like that idea. Which is great. So thanks, that we can try to bring that forward as part of the discussion on Thursday. The second solution of having sort of a broader definition that's used in some contexts, such as outreach, but a narrower one for others, such as grant making or the cumulative impact analysis. Can task force members, if you like that solution, go ahead and put your thumbs up. And again, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, so you can vote for both. All right, not seeing any thumbs for that. So, oh, Michael's thumb. Okay, so, all right, well, it seems like maybe there's a decent consensus around this first option. So Robin, thank you so much for coming up with that good kind of middle ground solution. And we can kind of build that in as sort of the assumed preferred approach of this subcommittee so that we're a little farther along in the discussions on Thursday, which is really great. So any closing thoughts on housing cost burden before we kind of move on to the next topic we want to discuss? And do encourage you all to spend some more time exploring the Tableau data between now and Thursday. All right, well then let's move on to the next topic. We're lucky to have Tova, our wonderful EJ program intern, here with us to answer any questions that might have come up about her wonderful research on census data reliability. So you all, I assume, have seen the link to that, which is in the agenda and was emailed to you. But during the previous task force subcommittee meetings, really for multiple subcommittees, we spent a lot of time discussing how statistical challenges make Census Bureau data have varying degrees of reliability depending on the geographic scale that we're looking at. So the more granular the scale, the less reliable the data. And as you all remember, you all decided that based on your discussions with the representatives from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, you were okay with any reliability concerns posed at the census block group level for at least the 3 specific indicators of race, income, and housing cost burden, because the data for those indicators in the census was at least fairly reliable. There's another Census Bureau data reliability question that came up, which was basically, there's been a lot of reporting and sort of announcements from the US Census Bureau at the federal level that there have been some reliability challenges with data that relates to race, and specifically undercounts of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx populations in the 2020 US Census, as well as likely overcounts of people who identify as white or Asian American. So Tova has put together this really great research on what does that mean for Colorado. I will just quickly paraphrase her research as this is definitely a challenge and a concern for the Census Bureau overall, and it's something that the Census Bureau will hopefully address in the future. However, for the specific context of Colorado, the Census Bureau itself did not find evidence of significant undercounts or overcounts. Therefore, there does not seem to be any solution or change to how we approach the data that has been implemented by other state agencies or other agencies or local governments within Colorado. So given that it seems that Colorado did not have the same challenges with the overcount or undercount as a lot of other jurisdictions, we are, as your staff, not recommending that you need to adjust how you use Census Bureau data at this time. So I will pause there. I know we didn't get this research to you until this morning, so thank you for your patience with us. That was not Tova's fault. That was just our overall staffing shortages. So that was not at all her having a deadline problem. She in fact got the research done really quickly. So thank you, Tova. But I do want to just pause and see if anyone has any questions or would like us to kind of go deeper into explaining Tova's research. All right, I am not hearing any questions. Oh, Michael, you just came on video. Does that mean you have a question or just turning your camera back on?
I was just in full transparency. I haven't had a chance to look at the report this morning or today. So I'll need to spend some time looking it over. And if I have questions, I'll submit them later.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And yeah, this is a good pre-meeting where hopefully we can take some issues off the table and resolve some outstanding questions before we all get together for a whole day in Grand Junction later this week. So yeah, hopefully, this is a good chance for you all to hear that summary, think of any questions you want to bring, and then we can always follow up at the full task force meeting on Thursday. Any other questions for Tova? She won't be able to stick around for the whole meeting. So if you do have a question for her, please ask now while she's here. All right, not seeing any. Oh, Beatrice, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if this is public information or is this just for the task force members?
This is just, we did create this just for the task force, but it is on your public Google Drive. So yeah, it's it hasn't gone through sort of the thorough review and vetting we would normally go through for sort of a big public document, and were we to formally publish it, we would do that. But yeah, this is, we did put it on the Google Drive for you all to review. So it is public. And can someone drop a link? I'm not great at doing that in the G chat. It's in the presentation subfolder for this subcommittee. Ian, go ahead.
Well, I had a chance to read through this document, and I guess I was kind of surprised to say that we weren't, that our state wasn't a state that was impacted by reliability. It just seems like all states would have been, and so I guess that kind of surprised me when I read through it.
Tova, do you want to try to explain any information about why Colorado might not have sort of specifically had the same undercount issues, or how basically how we know that Colorado is different than the national trends?
Yeah, so the census, after they do each census, the Census Bureau does a post-enumeration survey where they study like how well the census did in all the states, and they look at it like both on a national level and a state level. And they identified, I think, 14 total states. Some of them had overcounts and some of them had undercounts, but Colorado wasn't one of them. And they didn't really get into a lot of the reasons why this happened, but some of the news articles that I was reading said that it kind of depended on the amount of funding that each state put into the census. So, for example, Texas had a pretty significant undercount, and although there were some federal funding, because there's federal funding that goes to every state for the census, they didn't put as much funding into their like state level funding for the census in terms of like getting people to go door to door and outreach and like advertising the census as other states did, which kind of led to like lower participation rates in the census. And so I think Colorado probably just didn't have that same like lower level of state funding for the census. And as a result, like there was a lot more knowledge about what was going on, and there were higher participation rates as a result of that.
It's really interesting too, like you're looking at this graph and saying that Native people were overcounted slightly, particular Native Hawaiians. I don't know, we know how undercounted Native American people are. It just surprises me that they say it was actually overcounted.
Honestly, the census has been notorious for not reaching out or documenting Indigenous communities for generations and decades.
Absolutely. And I think if you kind of dive into the research and Tova's presentation, certainly the census in 2020 was not perfect, and there are a lot of ways it needs to improve, both in Colorado and elsewhere. And I guess for your purposes today, I guess as your staff, kind of given the information we've been able to find, I guess we just wouldn't recommend that you all change how you're using census data in the recommendation, or in the definition of disproportionately impacted community, that from the information we can, so for example, we weren't able to find examples of even states that had documented undercounts or overcounts using the data in a different way, but you could imagine, say, lowering the threshold from, 40% people of color to 39 or 38% to take into account, potential undercounts, for example. But I think given what we found, we wouldn't necessarily recommend making any of those adjustments as your staff, but obviously that's ultimately your call as the task force. So we're presenting this information to you to inform the question of, do you think you need to change the definition or how it uses census data, given these national trends that don't seem to have played out in Colorado, though, of course, the census still had a lot of challenges everywhere, which we definitely know.
I think seeing that this the undercount of the black community, I would be in favor of leaning in more to make sure that more, that we do capture those people, because the different groups of people that are undercounted, but certainly I've seen it reflected in community planning processes in Denver and in other places of like the big undercount of the black community or them being included. So I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but it seems like we maybe do want to skew it because I just don't feel as confident that the census is capturing the POC community.
I do not feel comfortable with just the census.
Thanks, Renee and Ian. Would one of you like to sort of suggest an alternative or like a change to the definition or how the definition is approached to reflect that? I think there are a variety of ways that it could be approached, but I'm curious if either of you has a preference. I'll kind of come back here to the language and the definition now.
Would we just lower the percentage of the community that identifies by like 5% or something, and then maybe we could capture, I think 5% would capture the difference of 2.5% that we're seeing here, at least in the graph that was in front of us.
I would like to see too how that works out. I don't want to just pick an arbitrary number. I'd like to see the impact that would have,
I don't want to overpromise because Thursday is very close, and we may not have it done by then, but would it be helpful? We do have Rani Kumar, who's with us, I believe in this meeting today, who is our new research and GIS analyst. So over time, she'll be able to kind of start working on these research questions for you all. Would you like to maybe see if Rani can produce something that shows additional census block groups that could be brought into the definition at lower thresholds? And just to give you all a menu of options, I wonder if we could sort of look at 35%, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. So kind of just at different gradations, you all can kind of visually see information on that, similar to what Margaret produced. Would that be a helpful homework item? I don't think we can commit to having that before Thursday, but certainly before the next full task force meeting or the subcommittee we can. Is that helpful, Tyson and other subcommittee members?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm good to see the comparisons.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Joel, before we leave, like what's on the screen right now, can I raise a question about some other language? But I want to give space for us to conclude discussion on this topic. Just want to flag that I want to talk about B for a second.
Absolutely, yeah, that's where we need to go next, is reviewing the draft recommendations. So any other sort of comments, questions, feedback on the Census Bureau data question, or can we go ahead and move on? All right, Robin, go ahead. We can now move on to our broader discussion of the recommendations.
Yeah, so this right on the screen here, B, the intro, any other community as identified or approved by a state agency. One thing that has been challenging as an agency to implement about the existing definition is that it's been very unclear, like what happens if a sister agency in a rulemaking determines that a community is disproportionately impacted, is that binding on my agency? And so my understanding is that we've settled on no, is that each agency is going to have the ability to add communities that relate to their work, i.e. like are disproportionately impacted by pollution or activities within the span of control of that agency. I would just request that we clarify this language. So we don't let this fly without a red line in our recommendations. As I don't love this intro parent clause to be, because that's very unclear. And so it should be clear that if the energy or the PUC determines that a community is disproportionately impacted because of grid reliability, that identification of that community is not binding on the Air Division, who is looking at additional communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. And so just to bring that up.
Thanks. Absolutely. Robin, do you have any red lines you'd like to suggest? And I believe all of you task force members have the ability to edit this document, so you're welcome to do it yourself. But how would you suggest changing the wording?
Well, it's a lot easier to say something needs fixing than to actually do the work and fix it, Joel.
Yeah.
I have started to noodle on some of this stuff. So let me dig out some of the work that I did a while ago when I was in service of our last meeting, and I will bring that on Thursday for consideration for the group, if that's okay.
Thanks, Robin. That is definitely fine. So appreciate you doing that. And yeah, we are at the point where we're going to have to start making a lot of decisions. So really appreciate you being willing to turn that around in a couple of days so that we can use it to inform the discussion on Thursday. Great. Well, what I'd actually like to do then is kind of come down here to this section of the document. Let me so you can all see it on one page. So we did go ahead in this document. Actually, I'll go back up to the top. So we, as your staff, I think all of you, I believe, except maybe Arthur, have been to another subcommittee meeting within the last week or so. But just as an overview for Arthur and members of the public who don't know, since we had the last round of the recommendations out for public comment in June, we received really robust feedback and a large number of public comments. We received about 240 total, including a large number of responses to a survey that we put out. So if you'd like to access the survey results, you can do so at this link. I will put in the chat momentarily. And essentially what we did is we took all that feedback that we got, and then we put it in an updated draft that we sent out to all of you to review, which is this draft. This is just an excerpt of the disproportionately impacted community section. And so I will say there was relatively little concrete public feedback that we were able to integrate on the definition. It was a less popular subject for public comment than a lot of other subjects. So there have been relatively fewer changes in this section, but still some. And so I would say really the only feedback we got on the wording was kind of feedback from the Environmental Justice Advisory Board, which is your sort of sister organization. It reviewed the definition and really suggested adding this vulnerable populations prong, which sort of gets at vulnerable or sensitive populations in a public health sense that are included in tools like Colorado EnviroScreen, and just sort of generally more at risk when we're thinking about cumulative impacts. We did include in the survey question sort of a question about, would you prefer option 1 or option 2 here in terms of the single standardized definition. So in the document that I just linked, if you scroll down to the bottom, page 6, you can see, I'll just bring that up on the screen. We really had pretty mixed results in the survey. There was sort of 38% on one response, for option 1, 28% option 2, 20% of people didn't think there needed to be a change from the current status of different agencies using different definitions, and then about 15% of people sort of selected other with varying types of feedback and that they provided, which we summarized here. So definitely not uniform results on that question in the survey. We did also ask about the housing cost burden question that we discussed, where there was sort of a clearer outcome. 60% of folks did think housing cost burden should remain in, or about 60%, and about 30% did not think it should be included, and about 12% needed more information or just answered maybe because they weren't sure. The last question we asked on this section was about using Colorado EnviroScreen to identify cumulative impacts, which is what I'd like us to discuss next. So there was about 41%, so not a majority, clearly did support using Colorado EnviroScreen to identify the communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong of the definition. About 26% said no, they did not support that. About the same amount, 23%, said that they sort of weren't sure and just said maybe, which makes sense. It's a complicated question. And then about 8% of respondents on just about every question just sort of responded other and wrote in variations on that they just didn't support the work of the task force in general. So that was sort of a true across the board. So with that in mind, I do want to turn us to this really important outstanding question that's still in the document, which is, should Colorado EnviroScreen be used to identify communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong of the definition, which again is the one you're just discussing here, which is sort of a community identified by an agency that is one or multiple factors, including socioeconomic stressors, vulnerable populations, disproportionate environmental burdens, vulnerability to degradation or climate change, and lack of public participation cumulatively affect health and the environment, which we just paraphrase as cumulative impacts. So I do want to see if we can have some discussion and kind of get closer to an answer on that question, kind of maybe informed by the survey data and just informed by all of our discussions to date, because how we identify that and sort of whether the task force recommends either through statute or just informally in its recommendations that Colorado EnviroScreen is the tool that's used by agencies to identify those communities would be a great question to try to answer here today.
I just have a question. If there was any information provided in the surveys about if EnviroScreen isn't used, what exactly would be used? Like, how would this be done without EnviroScreen? I don't know if that was any like additional thought, like, because yeah, that I'm just curious if any like thoughts about that came in.
I do not remember off the top of my head if anyone suggested an alternative. We didn't sort of frame the question to ask an alternative. So yeah, I don't specifically remember, but there were 203 survey responses and I read all of them a couple weeks ago now. So I apologize that I don't remember off the top of my head.
Please do not apologize. I'm just legitimately curious. And if other subcommittee members feel like we shouldn't use EnviroScreen, I would be very much interested in their thoughts on how they would propose this be done alternatively.
The only thing that I don't recall, or the only thing that I guess I haven't seen yet is, have we seen how EnviroScreen calculates? I still haven't seen that yet. I thought we were going to do that here fairly soon. So,
Tyson, do you mean just kind of a breakdown of the methodology that is used in EnviroScreen to sort of calculate the score?
yes, the breakdown of like, you know, how an air impact is weighted versus a water impact versus a, you know, income impact versus, you know, how are all these impacts weighted against each other through the calculation of EnviroScreen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we may have ended up presenting that to the data subcommittee rather than this subcommittee, but I'd be happy to kind of talk through it now if it's helpful. So I'm in the Colorado Enviro Screen tool now with my screen share. So this is just kind of an overall diagram that shows how different indicators are weighted. So it's sort of all these factors across different categories are cumulatively aggregated. So this is kind of the user-friendly version of the graphic. And then if you come up here under understanding the data to additional resources and come over here to the technical documentation, pardon my screen share in real time here, but I'll kind of go into that deep dive of that question. So there's a section in this technical support guide, which I will link in the chat for those following along at home, which is called scoring methodology. It really breaks that down more specifically, but essentially, this is kind of the more, sorry for my dog sneezing in the background for the background noise. This is how the calculation works. So for each component, there are 5 components, which are sensitive populations, demographics, environmental exposures, environmental effects, and climate vulnerability. Going to pause there for our interpreters. Sorry, that was a lot to read through quickly. There are a number of different indicators within them. So for example, in the environmental exposures category, there are actually 5 different air quality indicators built in, just to use that example, and then that you can kind of look through all the different indicators. So overall, the sort of health and social factors, so demographics and sensitive populations, receive 50% of the weight. And then the environmental side, so environmental exposures, environmental effects, and climate impacts also receive 50% of the weight. One thing we did is that because an environmental exposure is something that we know poses an immediate health risk, that receives 25%, so half of the overall environmental score. So that's something like lead exposure, air pollution, drinking water quality, so things that we're directly exposed to in the environment. Things that are maybe an indirect exposure, so it could pose a risk if maybe something went wrong at a facility, that like there's a violation of a permit limit that's intended to protect health, or some sort of other more indirect exposure mechanism that's in the environmental effects category. That gets 25% of the overall weight, and then climate impacts, so areas that are more vulnerable to the impact of climate change, also get 25% of the weight, because both of those categories are less connected to overall health. One thing to note is that the number of indicators within each category influence the weighting that each indicator gets. So there are 9 environmental exposures. So each of those 9 indicators contributes to 1/9 of 25%, so about 1%. Whereas with say demographics, there are 6 indicators. Demographics is 25% of the overall score, so that's closer to 4% of the overall score. So if you look kind of across the board, each individual indicator is weighted somewhere between 1 and about 4% of the total score, and it just varies a little bit by category, with that overall weighting sort of intentionally done from an epidemiological lens to prioritize things that have a greater health impact. So I know that's complicated. Any questions I can answer on that, or could I explain it a little better?
No, I appreciate that, Joel. I think it's just something that I need to dig into a little more to understand. But from an overall conceptual standpoint, I do think EnviroScreen is a great tool to screen for impacts. Again, I think it should be used as a screening tool, not a decision tool, because as we all know, and as we're all discussing, what's actually there is often different than, I mean, we're using a little bit broader strokes to try and compartmentalize some very specific impacts in some cases. So it definitely needs to be a screening tool, not a decision tool.
Thanks, Tayson. Anyone else can have thoughts, questions on either the EnviroScreen methodology, or I can move us back to the document and kind of the specific question of should we use Colorado EnviroScreen to identify communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong of the definition. Going to interpret that silence of everyone going through the technical user manual and answering all their questions, but maybe I can just kind of pose that first question here of should we use Colorado EnviroScreen to identify communities that meet the definition for a quick straw poll. If you are a task force member, oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna say, well, I'll hold my comment to the end.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
No. Carry on. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just put that to a straw poll. So to that question, please put your thumb up in Zoom or on your camera if you would support using Colorado EnviroScreen to identify communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong. So straw poll beginning. See 1 thumb, 2 thumbs, 3 thumbs. Four thumbs. So it seems like go ahead, Tyson.
My phone is overheating, so it's not letting me do anything. But again, I'm in support of utilizing it as a screening tool to help identify. But I think again, there's going to be instances where EnviroScreen might miss it, where if the right things are brought, then it's something that needs to be looked closer at. And there's also going to be instances where EnviroScreen says, yeah, it's a disproportionately impacted area, and then when you closely have action taking place, it may not be applicable. So as a screening, my only differentiation.
Thanks, Tyson. You cut out a little bit there. So I wonder if you could just, is that a yes or a no to that question? Do you think that agencies should use EnviroScreen as a tool to identify communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong as the definition?
Sorry, and I guess I'm hearing you say, is it the tool or a tool? And I'm hearing you say a tool. I think yes, a tool, yes.
So implicitly, then you're saying it shouldn't be both.
Shouldn't be the tool, and it also shouldn't be the all tool. I just view EnviroScreen as a screening tool, as a how do we break down and find them, easily identify areas where we need to take a closer look.
Thanks, Tyson. And I apologize. Yeah, thanks for muting. We get a little echo. So, okay, it seems like there were several thumbs up, but not universal consensus there. So maybe this is still an issue we need to bring forward for additional discussion on Thursday. And I am curious, kind of to Robin's point, does anyone have thoughts on essentially the alternative of what other tools or tactics agencies should use to identify communities that meet the cumulative impacts prong of the definition other than EnviroScreen? That is a hard question, so it's okay that there's no answer. So I wonder if we can kind of move down to the next sort of outstanding question for the subcommittee, which I think gets to the point Robin put in chat, which is essentially if an agency is going to implement the definition in a way that uses Colorado EnviroScreen to identify a community that meets the definition in a formal legal context, like a rulemaking, sort of how can there be an assurance that there's adequate process around what's in the tool that it can be appropriately used for that purpose? So Robin, go ahead. This is a question you
Thanks. Yeah, I think my comment addresses the next two bullet points, which are the definition in the statute should not identify a threshold, but should instead direct public process, which is an agency that is subject to this provision of the act. And I think Renee talked about this in our last in-person meeting, which is should have a full public process rulemaking to identify disproportionately impacted communities. Like, I don't think the definition should be like the end, right? The definition should be used to tell agencies what to do. And so after the EJ Act is amended, every agency that's subject should undertake a rulemaking to identify DI communities based on the definition. And that would provide the public process around all of it, including EnviroScreen, right? And how it's used. And there should not be a percentile threshold in the statute. So that is what I think sort of threads the needle of making sure we use this critical tool, because it's really hard to identify alternatives. Also, we put so much work in it, but we still have public process and we have flexibility, right? And we recognize that agencies are different and their concerns are different and the communities impacted by their actions are different. So that is my thought.
I like
which is
that a
stolen
lot.
from Renee's thought.
I like that.
Thank you. I like that a lot, honestly, because it starts at the EnviroScreen, but then it also, again, puts the onus of state and federal agencies to look at outreach differently and include.
Renee, you muted at the end of that. Were you done? I wasn't sure if that was on purpose.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that was done. Sorry, I'm driving.
No problem. Ian, go ahead.
Well, I caution sending all of this to additional rulemakings at committees. We've seen robust engagement from the environmental justice community engaging in this process. And if we push it down to rulemakings in every one of those commissions, it just means more work for our community.
Well, can I respond quickly to that, Ian? My understanding is that due process considerations require the identification in the rulemaking of the communities affected by the rulemaking anyway, because it can't change post hoc, right? So like in the oil and gas rulemaking last year, we had to adopt like a limited definition of what the communities that had been identified at that time, right? And so it's still, what I'm saying is I hear you, because then it just means communities have to engage in that rulemaking. But I guess my reaction is like communities are still going to have to engage in the rulemaking around this issue, because the agencies still have to do it in a rulemaking. It would just be in disparate rulemakings, like instead of in one centralized public process rulemaking, if that makes sense. That is my understanding of how it would have to work in implementation. It still has to be done through rulemaking, but this way it would be done in one rulemaking where everybody could participate at one time, instead of different rulemakings having different definitions of DI community depending on where they are at that time.
I think I get where you're going. So we push it down, and then you're saying you want them to just be able to decide their own EnviroScreen score, but it's going to end up in the procedural rulemaking either way, because that's the governing documentation, or that's the governing rules for the commissions.
I think I'm saying, like, if you, let's say the statute just says EnviroScreen score of 80. I'm just picking a number, right? And it basically in individual rulemakings, the commission is still going to have to identify each rulemaking, identify the communities that it applies to implement that definition. And so it's just a question in my mind of whether we do it in one rulemaking focused on like the definition and equity and all of that stuff, or whether it has to be done in each individual rulemaking, because due process requires that sources understands the scope of the obligations. And so if there's a rulemaking next year that has more stringent requirements in DI communities, that rulemaking will have to identify the communities that it applies to, so sources know, right, at that time, because it can't change later. The Administrative Procedure Act says that it can't do that. You can't like adopt something as amended in Colorado. I think that's right. That would to me be an Emily question, right? Like is basically if we put the whole meaning in a statute, does that avoid the need for rulemakings? My understanding is it does not, right? And directing agencies in a rulemaking to like flesh out the definition and the percentiles is not like an extra rulemaking that would have to happen, I guess is my point. But I would again defer to Emily.
I'm not an attorney, so I was trying my best to follow what you were saying.
I know, and I just play one on TV. I'm just kidding. I don't. I'm not a practicing attorney at the moment, so I'm aware of it enough just to like flag it as a question, right? If your point is that we don't want to have unnecessary rulemakings because that overtaxes communities that are already engaging on this question in this process, which is a totally valid point. My understanding is that it doesn't avoid a rulemaking, right? Is that you still have to have that implementation rulemaking. This just sort of provides the direction and the boundaries and centralizes it instead of having to break it up into bit by bit rulemakings.
I followed that.
Great, thanks for breaking that down, Robin. I am a practicing attorney and it's complicated. I would not be able to answer that question. So it seems like that is a great one for us to refer to Emily, our legal counsel for the task force, which we can definitely do. No guarantee she'll be able to get to it before we're all together in Grand Junction on Thursday, but hopefully she can at least start thinking about it and maybe provide some preliminary thoughts before we get to that part of the meeting. It did seem like there was fairly good consensus around this idea, Ian, with kind of that amendment of whatever would lead to the least amount of process for the communities who need to be engaged. Would you be sort of supportive of this approach?
Yeah, I think we need to less burden on the community that's already trying to engage. So whatever path that is.
Great. I will just go ahead and put that in here. So
I'm sorry, I have to hop off for a doctor's appointment, but I will see you all in person on Thursday.
thank you, Renee. Appreciate you making the time to be here, and we'll see you on Thursday. Well, great. So I think that kind of answered our next question also, which is sort of the percentile threshold, which would be determined on a case-by-case basis. I do want to see, does anyone have a strong preference on a percentile threshold that you think is worth discussing? I'm hesitant to put her on the spot, but Ronnie has sort of looked into it, and EPA, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, does use the 80th percentile with Colorado EnviroScreen, but there isn't necessarily a strong mathematical or sort of scientific reason that that threshold was chosen. It was sort of a discretionary policy choice, as I understand that choice. So that is one example, but do just want to, before we move on, see if there's any additional gloss on the percentile question other than what we just discussed.
Maybe a good exercise would be to try different percentiles and see if there's communities that particularly, I would imagine, rural communities that would be in or out, but I don't know. That's just an assumption.
And Ian, do you mean like, well, so would you be interested in seeing what would it look like if there were, what's like a range you're interested in, I guess? You know, maybe like every 5% from 70 to 95, is that about right? Or is that not right?
Well, I don't think that we should be less descriptive than the Environmental Protection Agency. So I would say 80% or below, I'd be more interested in seeing, like maybe 70, 75, 65. I don't, you know, the one that came to my mind was Battlement Mesa. I'd be interested to see where they show up. There's some, you know, rural communities that cross my mind and I'm curious about where their scores are. So
All right, you all are going to have a lot of maps to look at as your homework, and we have a lot of homework to do to create them. So thanks, Ian. We can definitely work on getting those. Obviously, that will not be ready by Thursday. That's a more kind of in-depth task. So, but I am glad Ronnie's here to kind of hear some of the work she'll get to do for our team and for the task force over the coming weeks. Well, I do want to move on to the next question, which is sort of the historical racism prong of the definition. And this is one that we've discussed a couple times. And you can see we have kind of taken the previous recommendations and tried to synthesize them and just kind of bring them together into more of a narrative format. But it sort of seemed that there was a general sense that that maybe because a lot of the areas that were brought in under the history of environmental racism prong were areas that would be otherwise included in other parts of the definition, unless they're an area that has sort of subsequently gentrified. It sounded like during prior discussions, task force members were inclined maybe towards removing it, but also some folks had discussed the idea of sort of keeping it in the definition, but allowing agencies discretion to implement that component of the definition on a case-by-case basis. So I want to kind of bring back that discussion, see if anyone has had sort of additional or evolving thoughts on that. It would, you know, we don't have to make a decision today, but it would be sort of great to get clear direction from that and kind of wrap up that discussion at the meeting on Thursday, if at all possible. So it is kind of a key outstanding question still for the August meeting. So I'll open that up for discussion.
I think in general, I'm supportive of giving agencies and departments discretion on a case-by-case basis. It's kind of where I fall on it, on this particular question.
I would note that if we adopt the Renee approach and have a rulemaking based on the definition, this is something that agencies could be directed to consider.
I think I would just like to see something that brings it to current. Meaning, if there's historical, is that historical still there? Again, so that it does exclude gentrified neighborhoods or neighborhoods where that complete population has been pushed out further. So that existing burden is still there.
Tyson, would you be okay with kind of this sort of second option that it sounds like Michael and Robin support, of sort of allowing agencies to make that decision on a case-by-case basis? So keeping the concept in the definition, but sort of allowing agencies to implement it sort of through their own rulemaking process, and consider that sort of historical through line at that stage.
I mean, yeah, yes and no. It makes sense that, I mean, I think all of our recommendations are going to a rulemaking and have to be, you know, evaluated by each agency to see how they fit within their rules. But, you know, if there's a neighborhood that has been, that experienced historical racism and they still fit under that category, they should be considered. And again, that's where, but if it's, you know, and again, I say this carefully, not understanding what the boundaries of the Rhino neighborhood are in comparison to census blocks, in comparison to people who exist in that neighborhood, who have been in that neighborhood throughout. I'm using this as a generality, understanding I don't know the exact numbers to it, but for instance, a neighborhood like Rhino that has been completely taken over by, you know, condos and restaurants and bars, and, you know, should they be continued to be considered under the history? I would say no. So I think it has to be brought to current by in some way, shape, or form, such as a community that continues to see impacts from historic environmental racism, so on and so forth.
Thanks, Tyson. And I do see Ian's hand is up, but before we call on him, maybe I can kind of put the question to you a different way. We've essentially put two options for doing what you said on the screen. One would be removing the prong from the definition altogether, so that sort of only present day factors, right? The demographic prongs or the cumulative impacts prong would bring a community under the definition. The other option is keeping the history of environmental racism prong in the definition, but allowing agencies to kind of evaluate on a case-by-case basis when they're making decisions, sort of whether areas should be excluded from the definition, kind of given their present day reality. So do you have so each of them would kind of, I think, get to the end goal you mentioned, but do you have a preference for either path of getting there, the sort of removal from the definition or the sort of case-by-case decision making?
Yeah, and I get, yeah. I will just, I guess I'll just kind of exclude myself from that vote, just because I kind of think that there's a third one, but that's fine. That's not, I definitely don't think it should be completely excluded, but I think that they're, yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with not excluding it. So you can go ahead with option 2, I guess.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, and I didn't mean to narrow the options. There are a lot of options still on the table, but that's helpful to know. You sort of don't like the idea of removing it altogether. So Ian and then Michael, and there's hands up, so I'll let Lubna take back over that facilitation while I type.
Sure. I just want to make clear, having grown up in a community, Cole, that is being gentrified, just because you're going through gentrification and condos go up doesn't mean that the communities and their descendants aren't still residing in those communities. It's not like we've been completely removed from those communities. There are a lot of people who are hanging on who know those histories, and I just want to make that clear that like gentrification doesn't equal completely excluded from the community. They're not, and I don't really want to see discretion given to agencies to exclude it. I think whether or not the historical racism has resulted in the citing of facilities that are still impacting communities today, no matter who you are. And I think that that's the real legacy, is the environmental racism has led to degradation. And there's a lot of soil pollution as an example that's still a result of that many and oftentimes the communities that move into there do not know, but they're still being impacted by them. It's still a justice and public health concern.
Thanks, Ian. Michael?
I hit the wrong emoji. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, no worries.
If not to put you on the spot, but did you mean to raise your hand or put your thumb up in support of a certain idea? Is that what you were?
I just think, I mean, Rhino's not a neighborhood. Rhino's is an art district. It's located in historic Five Points, which is a statistical neighborhood. But I hear both arguments. I mean, I hear or comments, right? Like, that area, just last week, experienced significant flooding due to the I-70 program, not having the drainage system set up. And so, I haven't lived there, and family who lives in Elyria, who grew up in Elyria, I get that. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just here, Joel, since you put me on the spot, I'm acknowledging both comments, one by Tyson and then the other by Ian. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot, and that is totally fine, right? I think we hadn't sort of taken everyone's temperature on this really tough question for a while, so it's kind of helpful to hear that I didn't hear anyone say we think the prong should be removed from the definition, but sort of how it stays in and how it's implemented, there's still kind of a range of views on, which is totally fine, but that does help us kind of narrow the discussion as we go into Thursday. So we do have 10 minutes before public comment. So I did want to come back to this last question that is outstanding of sort of the standardized definition. And this is, we've sort of been dancing around this question for much of the discussion so far, but kind of the two options of should there be one or multiple definitions. And so I think as we've gotten more feedback from the task force and from members of the public, this was an area where, for example, some state agencies weighed in and sort of suggested adding additional criteria that could be added. So we did sort of put those here in the document. One was suggested by the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the other by the Public Utilities Commission in their comments. But so these options are maybe coming together a little bit, but would kind of really appreciate hearing from the task force members. Do you have a preference? And I'm also happy to call up the survey data again, but just very quickly, there was maybe a general preference for option one in the public comment survey, though not a strong preference. It was just at 37.5%. So would love to hear from you all about kind of where you're at between these two options now.
I mean, I'll go I'll go first. I think, you know, I've gone back and forth. I think I feel like part of where we are is maybe like these questions have shifted a little bit in my mind. One is that like the definition of disproportionately impacted community is now like a directive to agencies to still go through a rulemaking. And so it is basically like option 2, but maybe it's without the different contexts piece, right? Or, so, I mean, I think, you know, I still believe that it would be efficient resources and important for flexibility reasons and important for tailoring, right? To have agencies undertake a rulemaking to identify the communities that are disproportionately impacted for purposes of highlighting which communities are going to be provided with outreach by that agency in which action, right? So like the Air Commission would have a rulemaking process where everybody would be involved and would say like in rulemakings, you know, this is what the Air Division should do, and these are the people that they should engage with, and it's DI communities that are impacted by the rulemaking action, right? And the commission says that. And then the commission says in permitting, right? These are DI like, you know, this is what the Air Division should do. Like they should reach out to the DI community impacted by the permitting action, and right? And should have this definition. It should be done in a rulemaking, and then that agency should identify like how and when those agencies are to engage communities in the various types of actions that they undertake. I think that sort of hits all the notes. It doesn't leave anybody out from being considered in an action that's going to impact them, right? An action of that agency that's going to impact them. And it efficiently uses limited state resources, right? Because agencies are going to be doing targeted outreach and targeted evaluations in their permitting action. So, and enforcement context and all of the things that we want to make sure that agencies are doing better to engage with and protect impacted communities. So I feel like that's still option 2 for me. You know, but I could get on board with option 1, but for me, option 1 has to come with, you know, there's DI communities, and then there's a different term for the communities that get the equity and not like the cumulative equity analysis, right? Because it's not every community. So I guess I just talked myself back into where I started this process, which is option 2. So sorry for clearly being a little loopy today and not being efficient in my words, but thank you for listening.
Totally fine. And it's been a few months since we sort of discussed these options as a group. So that was a helpful reminder of what option 2 would entail and sort of the pros and cons of option 2 compared to option 1. And I, you know, just for those who are like, you know, driving home or picking up kids or just, I think option 2 is fairly similar to what we called the Renee approach below of sort of an individual agency undertaking a rulemaking to implement the components of the definition that make the most sense for it in a specific context, with the statute itself providing a menu of options that include demographic factors or history of environmental racism or cumulative impacts in some form, but sort of leaving the specifics up to agencies to implement. Other thoughts on this option 1 versus option 2 question? And again, option 1 is a single standardized definition that is just fixed in statute that applies to all agencies.
I tend to, again, try to leave discretion to the agencies, because they're the ones that have to do the work, and they're the ones that have to deal with the staffing, and they have a constituency group and targets that they have to hit, and that they have to adhere to. I wrestled with this one. I went from option 1 to option 2. I'm glad that agencies chimed in, Joe, and provided their comments and feedback. Like, to me, seeing the polling and seeing who chimed in, I mean, I tend to support what the agencies are saying, and if they feel strongly about option 1, I'm certainly not gonna, because they're the ones doing the work. I think, and if they feel like they can meet these expectations, then I say let's move with option 1, and give the community, give industry some certainty, and so I'm fine. I guess I went back and forth. I mean, Robin, I think you really articulated in the meeting, the last meeting, why option 2, and I kind of went there. We met in person over in Commerce City, but I'm today I'm fine with option 1.
Sorry, Michael, did you mean option 2 or option 1 is your preference? 1. Okay.
And that's the one that where you got the most comments on.
That's correct. Option 1 would be one fixed. Well, sorry. So the survey that we put out to the public, about 37% of the 203 members of the public who responded had a preference for option 1. When agencies provided written feedback, I would say more of them indicated they preferred something akin to option 2, which provides additional discretion, though there wasn't.
That's so tough, right? Because I mean, I was appointed to represent communities of color, and if the community, it's like a balance, right? Because like I don't want to shortchange the community that participated in the survey, that really feel strongly about option 1, but I also have to be mindful of, can the agencies do what we're asking them to do? Because then you deliver false expectations, and you're not doing what the people are asking you to do, and so I wrestle with this one.
Let me see if I can put a finer point on it, Michael. Imagine that there's a bucket of money available to fund these revisions to the EJ Act to implement, right? And we've identified a lot of priorities. Is the money better spent on telling agencies to do outreach to all DI communities, even when they're not affected by the agency action, right? Because we have one standardized definition. So you're going to have agencies hiring people and spending money in communities that aren't impacted because there's a limited amount of money to implement this, right? Or do you want to make sure we get another recommendation of the task force on the table here, right? And we like target the resources. I'm asking us to put on our practical hats for a moment and think about, how do we want to spend the limited bucket of money available to us to pursue environmental justice in Colorado? And I don't mean limited by small, I mean limited in that it's not unlimited, right? We have to, at the end of the day, make choices about where to spend the money. And it is my position as representative of an agency, and I think you've heard loud and clear from all agencies, that they would rather spend the money on reaching people impacted by their actions, right? And not spend the money in a community not impacted because it's been identified as a DI community. That's my best and final pitch from a practical perspective.
I appreciate the dialogue and the further explanation. Yeah, having come from city government and been in the executive level of government, I have a sense, or I have an understanding of like being able to do the work and do it the right way, and not rushed and not, so yeah, I go back and forth. Like, I mean, I think in hearing you and hearing the breakdown, Joel, I think I'm at 2, not 1. But I mean, I could certainly be moved, but I much rather move right, not fast. And if agencies are saying that 2 works for them, then I want to give them the roadmap to do the work that they're going to be tasked with doing, and not putting an additional burden on them. And then they can work with their constituents, their industry, business folks, on a tailored process that works for their end users. And so that's where I land on that option 2 for me.
Thank you, Michael.
Today.
Thank you. That's helpful. I want to get to Ian because we're short on time and he's been patient. And so, yeah, thanks for that kind of final decision for today, Michael. So Ian, go ahead.
Well, I don't think that my opinion's made up on this, but I do really weight what the community feedback is. I'd have to dig in and really take a look at where the comments came from, the groups that are advocates along with the community and how they feel about it. I haven't had a chance to dive into that as we're talking here. For Robin's explanation, I'm following along with it. I guess I'd like to see like a real example of where they would have to be doing outreach and it just didn't make any sense, like for me to like follow along with that. And then I would like to say that, following along with what the agencies have been doing, which is easiest for them, has resulted in a lot of the environmental injustice in the first place, that I think our communities pushed back and fought for this in the first place. And so I'm trying to think of it out from the practicality of a person living in a house. So they're in a DIC community for the PUC, but they're not for CDOT, but they are for the AQCC, but they aren't for the COGCC. How do you make it user-friendly for a person who's living in a place to know whether it's applicable to them or not? And if we create a set of rules or definitions across different agencies, it's already like playing 10 sports for an environmental justice leader or community member to be able to engage and know what the right tools are available for them. But I don't want to drag on because I know we have to have room for public comment, but those are just some of the thoughts I have. I do really appreciate your explanation, Robin, and I'm going to mull over more of what you're saying. But from the end user, for a person in the government, really important. Also, the understanding for a person who's trying to advocate for themselves, it's really important too.
Thank you, Ian. And I will take the homework of going back to our engagement folks that have been doing this work and bringing like not generalized concerns, but concrete examples of where there might be like some of these resources that maybe weren't wisely spent because of like definitional issues, if that makes sense, right? Like where we could better ensure that the resources are spent actually reaching people and protecting people instead of just, right? But and then I'm still hoping that Joel got a ton of support on the Invest in Enviro screen to have people like click on their community and give them exactly that type of information that you were describing, which is like, I'm a DI community and I'm, for this reason. And so here are the protections I'm entitled to by which agency, sort of thing. So, but I will take that action item, Ian. Thank you for being open-minded.
Yeah, but does it make sense? Does it make sense what I'm saying about how it's challenging for the end user, the citizen or the resident?
100% it makes sense. I think I've gotten a tremendous education in the past couple years on how like data isn't information, right? And we need to make sure people have the information accessible about like what their rights are and and how they're going to be impacted and how they can engage, right? And so what you're saying makes a ton of sense to me.
Thank you both. And we don't have to have exact answers, but this discussion will really help us think better facilitate the discussion on Thursday so we can kind of move through these topics more quickly. But we did actually cover all of the sort of big outstanding questions for this subcommittee, which is wonderful, and have some clear next steps. We do have some members of the public here, so I do want to see if Dr. Dickinson or Sarah Bartlett, Jesse Fairweather, would any of you like to provide a public comment in our remaining time?
I've just been enjoying listening in, so I'll just say great work. These are not easy questions, but I think that the dialogue is really good, and it's definitely moving forward. So great work. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. And it looks like both Jesse and Sarah indicated in the chat that they are not interested in commenting at this time either. And I think everyone else here is either CDPHE staff or the interpreters. So with that, I think we can actually move into closing out. That's okay. So Lubna does have several reminders that we would need to pass along before Thursday. So if task force members can stick around for that a couple more minutes, we'd appreciate it.
Hey all, just a few quick reminders that public comment will be taking place from 5 to 7 on Wednesday. This is a special session to, put forth a better effort to better engage our communities on the Western Slope. And so for those who are attending in person, which the majority of you are, if you could plan to arrive to be there in person for the public comment session taking place on Wednesday from 5 to 7. The location is the same as the full meeting that's taking place on Thursday. So both meetings will be taking place at the Grand Junction Convention Center. If you're not able to make it, I know some people had planned their travel time around then. That is fine. Just please try to make an effort to attend virtually. And I just wanted to highlight the email that was sent on Friday, labeled board packet. It is really imperative that all of our task force members read that email in detail, and particularly that you all read the draft 2 of the recommendations prior to coming to the meeting on Thursday. We do recognize that it is a long document. It's 29 pages long, but please do dedicate at least a couple of hours to kind of reading through the document. I encourage you all to kind of download your own copy. You can do your own track changes, put in comments, whatever you would like, whatever would help assist you in best participating in the meeting on Thursday. But that is the most, out of the entire email, I know there was like several items, but out of all the items, that is the most important thing for you all to do in preparation for Thursday. Aside from that, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we do. We did include like an outreach and engagement communications toolkit. That was item 4 in the email that I sent out. Feel free to please use that to help boost our numbers in terms of public participation in the meeting. We do have people signing up for public comment, and turnout is pretty good so far, but would love to see more people come. We have our registration link, and the comms toolkit can be used to help you post on Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media platforms could be helpful. And so again, we really look to you task force members to help spread the word about the meeting, in addition to everything that we are doing. So just wanted to put those couple of plugs in. And then lastly, for those attending in person, please do book your hotels. I sent in some information about hotels in the email. You do have to book those yourselves and then submit a form for reimbursement. And we can definitely cover your stay for both Wednesday and Thursday night if needed. Ian, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage anybody who wants to tag along that you can take the bus staying for only $22 because of Senate Bill 180 that reduced the cost in half. There's one leaving at 7 a.m. from Denver and one at 10 that both get you there in time for the meeting. And then there's 2 that leave on Friday. And if you didn't save up enough time or you're busy and you need to do the reading, there's nothing like letting somebody else do the driving while you do it and taking climate action.
Thanks, Ian. And we did include information about bus staying in that email as well. You'll see the price, you'll see the schedule in that email. So again, we do encourage you all to use that public transit while it's available and discounted this month. And then for those where your schedule just absolutely does not permit you taking the bus, we do encourage carpooling. If you do know like another task force member leaving from the same area, feel free to contact them as long as you don't talk about board business. In setting that carpooling situation up or on the ride up, we are totally fine with you all coordinating that on your own. If you don't know who to possibly carpool with, but you do know you want to carpool, you can reach out to Morgan and she can kind of help put two people in touch if that's helpful. But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions in preparation for Wednesday evening and for Thursday. And really look forward to a productive conversation. And again, please do read the recommendations. And that's all from me. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. We can go ahead and adjourn 1 minute early. Look forward to seeing you all later this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.